Welcome everyone to our webinar on Iran, Israel, and the US. What's next? I'm Lahav Harkov, a senior fellow at the Misgav Institute and senior political correspondent for Jewish Insider, and I'm going to be moderating this session. And I'm here with the Misgav Institute for National Security, which is led by Meir Ben Shabbat, who is the Misgav Institute is Israel's leading national security policy center, working closely with decision makers to shape strategies to strengthen Israel's national security, regional cooperation, and international alliances. For those of you who don't already, you can follow our website, www.misgavins.org. Join our WhatsApp community. We'll send that link in the chat at the end of this webinar. And follow us on social media on X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Telegram for critical insights on the most important issues facing Israel in the Middle East. And again, we will put the link for our newsletter and our WhatsApp group in the chat. As the war between Israel and Iran rapidly evolves, we have with us leading experts and policymakers to discuss the next steps for Israel, Iran, and the US in this conflict that is reshaping the region. With me today are Dr. Victoria Coates, the former Deputy US National Security Advisor to President Trump, and currently the Vice President of the Heritage Foundation. Gilad Erdan, the former Israeli ambassador to the US and the UN, and a former senior cabinet minister in Israel, and now the director of the Misgav Institute Center for Diplomacy. And Dr. David Wormser, the former senior advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney and senior fellow at the Misgav Institute. We will begin hearing their insights in just a few moments, but I just want to tell everyone that you can send questions in the chat box, and we will choose a few for the panelists to answer at the end. So we want to start with opening statements for everyone. We'll give everyone about 5 minutes to tell us sort of what you're thinking about the topic at hand. So let's start with Ambassador Erdan.
Thank you, Lahav, and welcome everyone to this important webinar. Happy to be with all of you here. But before I will share with you my insights, I would like maybe to remind everyone the past and also the context for this not only discussion, but for Israel's defensive operation in Iran that we called Rising Lion. So let me remind everyone that since the establishment, the foundation of the State of Israel, sadly, even before, when the UN decided back in November 1947 on the partition plan, we had many Arab countries, many enemies that wanted to destroy us, and they never accepted the existence of the one and only Jewish state in any borders. Thank God we succeeded to defeat many of them, and that was the main reason why we achieved and signed peace treaties, peace accords with some of our enemies. We have signed peace agreements with Egypt, with Jordan. Later, a few years ago, the Abraham Accords with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. And simultaneously, throughout the years, Israel's advancement, the fact that most of our enemies realized that they cannot really defeat us on the conventional battlefield, have led us to the conclusion that we were left with only one existential threat, which is a nuclear Iran. And why? Because pretty much very early after the revolution in Iran back in 1979, the Ayatollah regime in Tehran, which is a very radical Shiite jihadist regime, announced that this is one of its main objectives, the destroying the one and only Jewish state. I'm sure, or I'm not sure, but you should be aware that in the center of Tehran, there's a ticking clock that is counting how many days we have until the destruction of the state of Israel. So since we realized that a nuclear Iran poses an existential threat against Israel. We have been following, we have been monitoring their nuclear program. And honestly, we have been trying to slow down their nuclear progress in order to prevent them from becoming a nuclear power. Throughout the years, Iran not only advanced its nuclear program, but they also armed their terror proxies around Israel. They built terror proxies like Hezbollah. They armed terror proxies like Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad or the Houthis. They armed them and supplied them with intelligence, with hundreds of thousands and rockets and missiles. They tried to entrench themselves on our northern border in Syria in order to build another Hezbollah that will threaten the future of Israel. And their vicious, crazy, I would say, vision was not only to surround us with a ring of fire with their terror proxies, but in the future, once they become a nuclear power, to supply their proxies with a nuclear umbrella. And again, for many years, we gave diplomacy a chance. We hoped that the international community would understand that a nuclear Iran poses a threat not only against Israel. Yes, we are in their neighborhood in the Middle East. We are the vanguard of civilization. But the international community should have understood that this is the civilized world that Israel represents here in the region against barbarism, against this terrible, dangerous vision to impose a radical Shiite hegemony, first of all over the Middle East, and later again on the entire world. So as I said, throughout the years, Iran exploited the diplomatic talks. They deceived the international community, but little by little, they continued to advance towards the production and towards the acquiring of nuclear capabilities. And I have to be honest here. I think that the October 7th massacre has changed dramatically the mindset of all Israelis. It really influenced and impacted our need to be more on the offensive, to initiate, because we swore after the Holocaust that never again. And sadly, October 7th was our never again moment because it happened again. So many Israelis were massacred, were slaughtered, and we swore again that we will never be caught off guard again. And that was the reason why we initiated the operation in Gaza. That was the reason why we initiated the operation in Lebanon and took out Nasrallah. And recently, we got a very clear intel that Iran has decided to accelerate its production of nuclear weapons, but not only their nuclear weapons. They have decided also to accelerate their production of the means to carry those nuclear warheads, meaning their ballistic missile programs. And by accelerating these two programs, Iran has created, as we call it, a double existential threat against the future of Israel. So we were left without any other option but to act as last resort and as part of our right to self-defense. Because as I explained, a nuclear Iran armed with thousands of ballistic missiles is an existential threat against Israel, not only against Israel, but also, as I said, against the entire world. That's why we initiated Operation Rising Lion. The goal of the operation is, of course, to remove this double imminent existential threat against Israel. How do we do it? We do it simply by inflicting maximum damage to their nuclear program, to their ballistic missiles and launchers. We try to degrade their capabilities as much as possible. And maybe it's important also to emphasize that when it comes to this vital operation for Israel, it's very important to understand the Israeli people are fully united behind this operation. We are determined. We are willing to pay the price. We are paying a heavy price every day, especially every night. But when it comes to achieving the goals of this, the objectives of this operation, there's no left or right. And I'm sure that many of us also realize that it wasn't only our intel. Even the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, have decided recently that Iran is advancing its nuclear capabilities, and there's no reason for them to enrich uranium to such a higher level unless they have a military program. Thank God, up until now, we succeeded to surprise them. We had many achievements, and it's also important for us to highlight that we are not in a war with the Iranian people. For the Iranian people, for many years, were our friends, maybe our allies. We had many collaborations with them until the revolution, and since then they are being oppressed by their radical regime. So as I emphasized, this is an operation of self-defense, and if I may say so, there are the formal objectives of our government, which I explained.
Sorry,
But
Ambassador, that you've been speaking for a little while, so like maybe we should
yeah,
give
this is
someone
my
else a
last
turn.
sentence.
Okay,
This
thank
is my
you.
last sentence. Personally, I would say that even though the formal objectives are, as I explained, or the ones that I explained, personally, I believe that without a regime change in Tehran, we cannot achieve peace and stability in our region, because even if we delay their nuclear program and destroy most of their ballistic missiles, this crazy, ruthless regime will continue to try and advance their dangerous vision. So only a regime change is the real solution.
All right, Victoria, what are you thinking these days? If you make your opening statement.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all of my friends at Misgav. I actually very much wanted to participate in this, just to hear what you all are going to say, because obviously we're very deeply curious on this side of the ocean to see what the next steps are. And I think from the American perspective, the president was very clear after the inauguration that he preferred a diplomatic solution to the Iranian problem, and obviously consulted closely with the prime minister. They set that 60-day timeline on it. The Iranians, I think, assumed that they were going back into the kind of diplomatic doom loop that we were in during the Biden administration, where you just talk and talk and talk and nothing gets resolved, and they spin and spin and spin and enrich, and the situation drifts towards a crisis, which is what essentially the new administration inherited. And I think the president's trip to the Gulf in May was very important to talk to Saudi and Qatar and UAE and get their views on the situation. And I think it is encouraging to hear reports that pretty much all of the GCC is participating in destroying some of these Iranian projectiles, missiles, and drones as they pass through their space. So I think their very muted response is also an important aspect of this, and a real indication that nobody wants to see Iran go nuclear except possibly the Iranians. And last point to what Gilad was just saying about the Iranian people, that's something President Trump has also been talking about. While being clear, we're not going to be in the regime change business, but if they are in the regime, if the Iranian people decide they want to change, that's something we can support. I think at least symbolically, it's enormously important that Elon Musk turned on Starlink for Iran. As we all know, it's going to take a little bit more than just Starlink to get secure communications into the hands of the Iranian people. But that's something we potentially could do and could be a game changer for them. So I'm very, very curious to hear what you all think are going to be kind of the next steps. There are some loud voices here in the United States saying that, oh my gosh, this is World War III. Our messaging is that no, Israel spent the last 20 months preventing World War III from breaking out. But we are curious to hear your views on how you think the next days and weeks are going to break down. So I'll leave it there, and then we can get into further discussion.
All right, thank you, Victoria. And last but not least, we have David.
Thank you, Lahav. It's such a pleasure to be here. Although where here is an issue. I'm in Rome. I'm one of the stranded passengers who are on a plane to Israel, still trying to get there. But so it's fitting, being that Victoria's in Washington and Gilad is in Israel. I'm in between. Now, I think the sentence that Ambassador Erdogan said at the end, which was the raising the regime change issue, and Victoria raising the issue of the Iranian people, I think we've crossed a Rubicon in Iran where Israel is now deliberately and aggressively, thankfully, providing an opportunity for the Iranian people to do what they have wished to do for a long time, or we hope they've wished to do for a long time, and we believe they've wished to do for a long time, which is to take their country back from this leadership. And I think this gets to the core of where we're going. Because we used to say what was before October 7th isn't what will be after October 7th. What was before June 12th or 13th is not what will be after June 12th or 13th. And unfortunately, I keep seeing the pressures from the administration's staff. I don't believe the president is there, but I see constant pressure from the administration staff to return to older ways of looking at this problem, which are stuck. It started with Gaza, which when Witkoff, when he started negotiating the ceasefires, unfortunately he had no staff, so he was advised by people maybe hung over from the previous administration. And it sort of locked the new team into concepts and paradigms that came from the previous administration. And similarly with Iran, that somehow we can come to a negotiated settlement with a regime that joined the NPT in order to cheat, that enters every agreement as a weapon to cheat and disarm the enemy. So I think we're beyond negotiation with the regime. We're now entering that zone where we've handed the Iranians they have to join the war, and it's their war as much as anybody's, and they have to join the war against their common enemy with Israel, which is the regime. Now, the problem is that there seems to be pressure coming, probably not from the president, but from some in his coalition in public. We all know who they are, people like Tucker Carlson and others, but certainly they have their allies in the administration. And they're pushing this idea that, oh, well, if the Israelis kill Khamenei, or if they create a collapse of the regime, then we have chaos. And oh my God, there's chaos that will draw America in. And then America will have to deploy. And then we're going to have thousands of dead Americans in a nation building exercise. So it's good that Israel's striking, but only in as far as it allows the negotiations to get back on track and build leverage on the Iranian regime to get into a productive agreement. Of course, for Israel, there is no productive agreement anymore. And whatever is done through a negotiation, they will face again within 2-3 years at most, if the war stops until it's finished. The second thing is that it's a misread of what happened in Iraq. There were strong forces that said, let's not do this. Iranians are, back then in Iraq, it was also voices. The idea of this massive semi-colonial presence to rebuild the country. There were a lot of people who weren't for that. It wasn't necessarily the inherent concept of the war. But in this case, it's completely different. The Iranians are not Iraqis. The Iranians are an amazingly resourceful people. They're a 3,000-year-old culture. They're proud. They want their country back. They have amazing skill and diligence to do so. They may need some help from us, and they will ask for help from us. And we can do it. We can send technicians to help rebuild their energy structures, including electricity and oil and so forth. But we do not need to run Iraq for Iraqis. The Iraqis themselves will step up to the plate and they will take over. And they have their pride on the line. And taking over from them denies Iran the one thing they really want, which is their dignity back from a regime that stripped them of their dignity. So it's so important. And I think it's also, this argument is put forward in bad faith. It's in bad faith by the very people who argued against this war to begin with, who argued against taking a hard line against Iran, who argued that Iran is not a threat. Now they're arguing, well, stop the war now because there can be now a negotiated settlement. So I don't even believe they're arguing in good faith. It's just the latest rendition of what we need to do to stop the Israelis in their mind. So at any rate, I think this is one of the main issues that are coming now. The Israelis are determined to go all the way. They're laying the groundwork for the Iranian people to join them and finish it off in a good way. And I think at this point, the best thing for the United States to do is just let that play out. Back up Israel, back up the Iranian people, and let it play out. Any attempt to try to force a ceasefire now or negotiate one, I think is highly counterproductive and could lead to a very bad result in the long run.
Thank you. I'm gonna pick up where you left us and ask Victoria, who I think might have some good insight onto these sort of divisions, or maybe not even divisions, but debates within the Trump administration and within Trump's sort of broader coalition. Trump has said mixed things. I mean, a few weeks ago when he was in the region, he spoke out against nation building and the neocons, et cetera. And so you'd think that from that he would be opposed to, action that could take down the Iranian regime, perhaps. And of course, we hear voices like Tucker Carlson and others who are thought to have an influence on him. And on the other hand, he's certainly not saying those kinds of things in the media lately. He even said, I think it was Sunday night. No, I think it was Saturday night, where he said that the U.S. might even have to join in. So where do you think the sort of Trump coalition, the people around Trump, President Trump, stand on this? And what kind of an influence do you think that they're having on the president's decision making?
Yeah, I think it's really critically important to listen to what the president says. There are a lot of people who are saying a lot of things that they probably shouldn't right now. And the president has been very clear. He does not want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. He will take strong action to prevent that from happening. And what else has he done? He's dispatched the Nimitz, another aircraft carrier, to the region, which is a pretty major signal. My understanding from Tampa is the military to military coordination is going extremely well, and that we are adapting to what the Iranians are doing in terms of the kind of just willy-nilly targeting of civilian targets rather than trying to isolate their fire to military or strategic targets. So that's that'll be a little bit of a process, but my understanding is that's going well with the full support of DOD. So whatever Tucker may or may not say, he's had to walk back. The president had some strong words for him in the Atlantic. So I don't see him having a particularly significant voice in this kind of matter. And so I think the support will be ongoing. The concern will be, that we, the president's inclination is to get to a diplomatic solution. And he has also had strong words for the Iranian people, similar to what the prime minister said in his Fox interview yesterday. So I think he is very supportive of that, but that as Dave said, the Iranian people are going to need to do this, and that they are going to want to take their country back. And I agree that if that were to happen, yes, we would be standing by with technicians, but we're not going to invade to make it happen. And that's just not going to, that's simply not in President Trump's vision for how this might play out. So as I said, I would listen to what he says and watch what he does. And for the other voices, that I just don't see them having a significant sway. And one other thing that I think is critical is watch what the Congress does. And you literally have no one in Congress. I mean, if you've got Chip Roy putting out strong statements of support for Israel, for what Israel's mission is and what they're doing, there really is not a significant conservative opposition to Israel. There may be two people, and we all know who they are. And so they're not going to be persuasive across the board. And the other piece of good news is, while the vast majority of the Democrats in Congress are on the wrong place on this, there are enough that are in the right place that we can maintain the majorities, even if you have one or two conservatives. So I think that, that is where we should be focusing, rather than on the folks who literally are just doing this to get attention.
Thank you. Gilad, I wanted to ask you, almost every time Israel enters a war or a major operation, its allies in the West start out very supportive, and then they lose patience at a certain point. And that is often true for the United States as well, but certainly true for other allies like Europe, Canada, Australia. We saw with October 7th versus the current attitude towards the Gaza war. Do you think there's a chance that Israel is going to face pressure of that kind that won't allow it to complete its mission in Iran now?
No, I don't think it can happen. Usually, when we were facing international pressure, political pressure to cease our fire, to stop our operations, it was mainly about the conflict with the Palestinians. The Palestinians are much more popular within the international community, their cause, sadly. But when it comes to the Iranian regime, I think even a long time ago, they have lost their popularity. But if we look at what happened during the last few years, Iran truly has proven itself as an ally against civilization. I mean, they supplied attack drones to murder Ukrainian civilians. They helped the President Putin. They attacked the cybersecurity infrastructure in Albania. They supplied the Houthis with intelligence and missiles to endanger maritime trade. I think that many countries realized that Iran poses a threat against them as well. I can say here, or tell you here, that when I had talks and meetings, bilateral meetings with European countries and many countries that usually used to apply pressure against Israel not to stop military operations, and when I was speaking with them about Iran, they always told me, look, Ambassador Erdan, we know you're right about Iran, but sadly, our group has decided to vote differently because of this interest or that interest. I hope many of you understand that when it comes to the UN and the international community, it doesn't work based on bilateral relations. It's many times works based on the group of the interest of the regional or religious group that they belong to. So this time, it's only or mainly about the backing of the American administration and first and foremost, President Trump. I'm sure that we did not get any red line from him, and I'm sure that it was in a way coordinated with him, because it was after the 60 days that he has announced set for the negotiations with Iran, and he can use it now as a leverage for future talks. But honestly, I don't see the Iranians willing to give up uranium enrichment on their soil. So I predict that the American backing will continue.
David, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the targets that Israel has hit in Iran and the impact they're having on the regime's ability to continue its policy of, threatening Israel, attacking it directly and indirectly through proxies. And also where we think the nuclear program stands now after the damage that Israel has done to various nuclear sites.
Well, on the target list, it's one of those multiple choice questions where you have all of the above. So the answer is D, all of the above. But it's clear that there have been some focus points and some things left aside and so forth, right? At first, I think Israel struck the nuclear program as best it could. It struck air defense and tried to deal with the missile threat as well as it can. It wasn't going after regime change type strikes at the beginning. And it was obvious why. I mean, the missiles were the big threat. The air defense radars, early warning radars, all radars, and air defense structures were the thing that threatened Israeli air capabilities and therefore had to be cleaned out. And the nuclear program, given if there was anything that went wrong at any point, everything had to be called off or so forth, that was the most important thing to hit up front. So that was the first 2 or 3 days. And remember, we're only 3 or 4 days in this. It's really stunning how far the Israelis have gone. Since in the last 24 to 36 hours, the Israelis have shifted. They're still, I think they're de-emphasizing a little bit the nuclear because the big thing they have to deal with still is Fordo. And that's a big thing, but it's a very complex thing. And it requires other things happening first. So I think it's been slightly put aside. The air defense is largely down and gone. The radars, you see still some cleaning out operations going on. And now that the Iranians are hitting Israeli cities, the Israelis, this is where I think it's crossed the Rubicon and can't be reversed anymore. I think at this point, the Iranian regime can't survive this, both in terms of what it is capable of. If it will fall at some point in the next months or years, very soon, because such a humiliation brings down regimes. Or it might even fall very quickly, hours and days. Obviously, Israel prefers the latter, and the Iranian people prefer the latter. So Israel's working very hard to essentially eliminate symbols of the regime. Part of that is command and control. Israel has struck hard against the command and control structures. And this is reminiscent of how they struck Hezbollah in Lebanon. Without proper command and control, whatever strategy Iran had and capabilities they still have become far less capable of being used and certainly not used very, very strategically or effectively. So I think what you're seeing now is a heavy emphasis on hitting regime symbolic targets, hitting command and control structures, blinding the Iranian regime. And then very soon, I would suspect, you're going to start seeing Israel circle back and with the freedom of action that they have from all this tactical victory to return to the issue of Fordo, which is the big nut to crack, the huge amount of enriched uranium that's there and the enrichment structure that might still be residual there. If what we heard is right, Natanz, the other big nut to crack, collapsed this morning. The underground apparently collapsed. So it's really quite likely that Israel has mostly to deal still with Fordo. And there's several ways to deal with it. There's obviously, if the United States joins, you can take out a mountain in a few hours. If Israel has to do it, it'll take them a few days, or maybe more, or maybe there's some other ways to do it that probably not good to go over on this public forum. So I think that will happen. But again, it means Israel needs time to finish this. It means the Iranian people have their shot. It means that Israel is still facing missiles, but each day it's degrading, and hopefully we get to a certain subcritical level where the air defenses of Israel are really no longer overwhelmed in even the slightest way. So that's where we are in terms of targets. The regime targets are the big ones for Israel. And that's, I think, where the United States is, those various camps are so nervous. I think Trump's with Israel and looks at it more that way. I know CENTCOM does, by the way. But there are voices that don't see it that way and are nervous about the regime change structure. And again, it's not Israel's to run the country. It's not America's to run the country afterwards. To be clear, when we talk about regime change, we're not talking about nation building. Iranians will build their nation.
I think Iranians are pretty
Resourceful.
they are a nation, right? Like
They
they don't
are a
need to be
nation. Their
built. They
culture
are a
and
nation. I think they have
civilization,
yeah.
and they're resourceful.
Yeah. Victoria, I want to ask you, you said we should listen to what President Trump says, that there are some things that President Trump said that are somewhat inconsistent, and he was talking until very recently, maybe even his most recent comments, about the possibility of reaching a deal with Iran still. Do you think that that's something that the US is still going to try to pursue now, reaching a deal to stop Iran's uranium enrichment, or do you think that we're at a point where they're not there anymore?
Well, what he said that I found particularly interesting, and this was on Friday because I actually said it first on Mornings with Maria, and then he said it, which I think is a coincidence, but it's an important point, which is that the action Israel has taken to materially degrade, and especially if they can get Fordow into the same condition that Natanz is in, that increases the likelihood of an actual deal, of getting them to the table in a mood to make concessions, not demands. And so if we think back to the conclusion of the Iran-Iraq war, I mean, what finally got them to make material concessions was the fact that the stability of the regime was very much in doubt. And so, as my colleague Rob Greenway likes to say, in their worldview, the nuclear program is the queen on the chessboard, regime survival is the king, and you only sacrifice the queen to protect the king. And that's if we can put them in that position where that's their choice, they could potentially get to a verifiable dismantlement deal. Do I think that's likely? Not hugely, but it is now possible. But it's possible because of what Israel did. And I think the president's approach to this was that he would give them a chance at diplomacy. And, he did everything by the book. He wrote a letter. He, sent one of his top people to engage in the negotiations. So you can't accuse him of racing to war or rejecting diplomacy. But at the same time, when his deadline expired, he did nothing to prevent Israel from going in and has been supportive in material ways. So I think it is now more possible, but I still don't think it's likely, but it's more possible.
Okay, thank you. Gilad, I want to go back to something you said before about people who publicly voted against Israel in the UN, but then in private would say to you, that they stand with Israel against Iran. What is your assessment, as a experienced Israeli diplomat, of the response from other countries in the region, particularly the Arab countries with which Israel has peace, also Saudi Arabia? They've made very negative statements about Israel's strikes on Iran, but what do you think is their actual view on what's going on?
Well, I think there's no question that they are happy with what Israel has been doing since the beginning of this operation. Without elaborating or giving names of Arab countries or their ambassadors, I can tell you here that even after we initiated our operation in Gaza, many of them came to me behind closed doors and told me finish the job and how much they know that Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood and it endangers their regime, their governments as well. But they were almost apologized that they have to align themselves with the OIC group, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And when it comes to Iran, I think that it's even clearer. I mean, we can see leaders like the Moroccan king that even during our operation in Gaza allowed Israel to participate in military drills on his soil or signed military procurement agreements with the Israeli aerospace industries. But there are others, without, again, giving their names, that I remember many conversations and discussions with them about Iran and how frustrated they were from the fact that the international community, first and foremost the UN, was so friendly towards such a murderous, genocidal regime that also attacked them. For example, the UAE, they knew that Iran is behind the Houthis' attacks against on Abu Dhabi or against Aramco oil field in Saudi Arabia. And when they saw that the Secretary General instructed the UN to hold a vigil for the memory of the butcher of Tehran, President Raisi, and to lower the UN flag. How, I mean, how crazy can you get and become this corrupt and distorted system, political system of the UN? So based on what I heard from them throughout my 4 years term, I'm totally convinced that these are only empty words in order to appease the public opinion, but inside of them, they're very satisfied from what they're seeing in Tehran right now.
And just as a follow-up, do you think that this is going to bring Israel closer to normalization with Saudi Arabia?
100%. President Biden said that he had the intel that October 7th was one of, I mean, the normalization, the fact that we were very close to normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia was one of the reasons for Hamas to initiate the October 7th massacre. And I'm sure Iran, that we heard Khamenei, their quote unquote supreme leader, criticizing directly many times Arab leaders who normalized relations with Israel. He said that they would regret it, they would pay a price. Sure, so for sure, once Iran can no longer endanger those Arab governments and leaders, I'm sure it will be much easier for them and much easier for the American administration to incentivize them to normalize relations with Israel. And everyone knows Iran is the main obstacle to achieve security and stability in our region. Without a nuclear Iran, without Iran armed with thousands of ballistic missiles, the future of our region can be very, very bright.
Thank you. I'm going to go to audience questions now. We have two people, one anonymous and one from someone named Steve, asking if the US will get directly involved in attacking Fordo. Victoria, why don't you tell us if you think that there's a chance of direct US involvement?
I think that that's going to be a wait and see kind of situation. That President Trump's preference is to not be directly involved in attacks and to hold US involvement to the defense of Israel. But if it's a situation where that is what will decisively conclude this operation, and it's a fairly straightforward as Dave said, a fairly straightforward, targeted operation, it is certainly possible. But I think he would prefer to keep us on the defensive side of things.
Thank you. There's a question here that's specifically for David. Do you think a deal is advisable in any circumstance when it looks like Israel is winning? So why doesn't Israel just win instead of, stopping for negotiation if that's what the US wants?
Well, the United States has decided not to participate in this, and I think it's a good thing. I'm actually very happy Israel did it alone, and I'm very happy that the United States isn't involved, because we don't have fully aligned interests on this. But that said, this is a moment in which we have an ability to solve the problem. And not only solve the problem, but to create a fundamental strategic reorientation that can last for decades. If there was one lesson that came out of October 7th, wasn't to manage problems, but to solve them and make sure that problem never happens again. And that could only be done in Gaza by destroying Hamas and removing it. Any deal with Hamas that leaves it in power means that there's another October 7th somewhere in the future. And there certainly will be a lot of other days in which there's rockets on Sderot and stuff like that. Well, the same thing on a larger scale strategically now applies to Iran. The Middle East is at the edge, really on between a tremendous strategic improvement or a strategic descent into an endless war. So if you want to avoid an endless war, you really should go for the decisive result right now. The decisive revolt is to finally get rid of this regime that has haunted the region and the world for the last 46 years? So and I mean the world. Look at how much power does Russia have against Ukraine if you remove all those drones that Russia's been using from Iran, let alone some of the missiles? So Iran has become a major strategic asset for axes of evil, whether it's the Chinese Belt and Road, whether it's the Russian structures, however you want to look at those conflicts. Iran has become a major part. Israel is handing everybody this chance to remove this threat once and for all for decades and generations. And yet there's this impulse to go the easier route and accept something that will leave the problem to be re-arise in 2-3 years, and it will re-arise, even if Iran gives in on everything and eliminates its nuclear program according to the agreement. Iran cheats, and it's good at cheating, and it will always cheat because that's who this regime is. And we will face then in 5 years, you had it with Saddam Hussein, smart sanctions, less sanctions, targeted sanctions, in the end, no sanctions. Iran will eventually cheat and eliminate the restrictions it has, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, but we will be haunted by not finishing the job now.
Well, David, that's great because you answered. It's not great, but it's great that you answered a lot of questions people
Yeah,
had
and by the
all in
way,
one answer.
if we don't solve it now,
Yeah.
then America will be bogged down in endless wars in the region because Iran will start them.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. No, and thank you for giving such a broad answer because people asked about China and Russia. They asked about whether there's a risk that Iran will try to build its nuclear program over again. So I think you've answered a lot of our questions in one. This is an interesting question, which maybe David or Gilad can answer. Do you think there's a chance that Israel could send in ground forces to try to take out Fordo? That's not a scenario I'd heard of
I
before.
can
So is that
just
something?
join. I think that they've answered it in his own way, and he said that even if we think so, we're not going to say it here or elaborate on the means, methods, tactics that Israel is operating in Iran, outside of Iran. But we have many surprises, that's for sure.
All right, I think this is going to be the last question, which anyone anyone who has something to say can answer. You know, there's just our friends in the diaspora Jews are facing a really challenging time. And maybe this isn't a direct question about Iran, but still, when Israel's at war, it's often a harder time for the diaspora communities. So I guess their question is, do you have anything to say about how this is going to impact Jews around the world? And also if anyone here has any particular knowledge about the Iranian Jewish community and how this might be impacting them. You know, this is a surprise question. I'm not sure anyone has expertise on that, but if they do, chime in.
Well, I actually was just profiled in the New York Times on this topic because we at the Heritage Foundation had the temerity to launch Project Esther to try to combat anti-Semitism in the United States with the recognition that this is now a domestic issue, not just an international issue, and that we have to deal with it. That's one of the main themes of my recent book, is that is one of the reasons the situation with Israel commands our attention as the United States, even as, you know, we don't want to get overly entangled, but this is a problem here at home. So, you know, we're working on legal, legislative, and financial potential penalties for material support for terrorism, and, you know, dealing with all the free speech issues and some other things. And what was interesting about the New York Times piece is they were trying to hate us and do a hit piece, and it wound up being actually quite positive, and we're raising money off of it hand over fist. So we should probably write them a thank you note. But the good news there is there are a lot of Americans across the conservative spectrum that are deeply concerned about this and want to support what we're doing here in the United States to get after it.
Does anyone else?
Yeah. You know, anti-Semitism is, on the immediate tactical sense, Israel's winning will most likely calm things down. Leaving anti-Semites rather shocked and stunned tends to shut them up. So I think on the tactical level, that's one thing. The more Israel wins, the better off. But on the long term, anti-Semitism is never about the Jews. It's about the anti-Semites. And the debate in society is more about the society than it is about the Jewish question. And as a result, the West really faces a choice here. There's a civilizational attack on the West that is expressed through the issue of Jews and Judaism and the idea of the Jews, which is part of the Judeo-Christian core of the West. And therefore, it's this attempt to destroy that, which is part of the overall attempt to destroy the West. And I really think at this point, European leaders, and frankly, more and more American leaders, and this is what disturbs me to say, really have to make a choice whether they stay true to who they were, especially in the American sense. The Jewish people have been so deeply intertwined with the American idea since the day America was born, whether it was the funding of the Revolutionary War, to the involvement and the imagination and the ideas that our founding fathers had about their shape of America was very much based on this biblical idea in a civilizational sense more than even a religious sense. So this is what's really on the table, and that's really for non-Jews to step up to the plate and say, no, we have built an entire world around a certain involvement of the Jewish idea and a favorable embrace of the Jewish people. And America has been built on that. And if we really have to save that in order not to go down the way that many other civilizations have gone down that have embraced anti-Semitism. Europe is on the cusp. It has to make a choice. And so far, establishment of Europe is not making the right choice.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. This has been very interesting. So I'm glad you could all participate and answer my questions and the audience's questions. We have a link in the chat to sign up for our newsletter and to join our WhatsApp community so that you can get updates. We send out a regular update of 5 things you need to know about what's going on in the Middle East, and I highly recommend it. So you should try and sign up with the link in the chat. And we'll have more webinars in the future. So thank you very much.